Thank you for joining today's webinar. I'm Ecolab's lead entomologist, and as the lead entomologist, I'm responsible for research and development activities that are related to our pest program. And my research efforts are specifically focused around mosquito biology and control. I'm going to start today's presentation with a brief introduction to mosquito biology and behavior, and then I will hand it over to Dr. Hanlon to discuss Zika virus in more detail. After that, Dr. Hanlon will turn the presentation back over to me, and I will finish up with a summary of some of the ways that you can reduce your risk of mosquitoes and the Zika virus. After we finish today's formal presentation, Dr. Hanlon and I will be happy to take some questions from the audience. So as a reminder, please continue to type in your questions throughout today's presentation. There are a few key takeaways that I'd like you to gain from today's session. And number one, first one here is mosquitoes are more than just a nuisance. They are one of the most deadliest animals on the planet. The mosquitoes that transmit Zika virus are also responsible for transmission of dengue and chikungunya. And these diseases can cause significant illness, long-term health effects, hospitalization, and sometimes even death. Ecolab's three-step mosquito elimination program will help reduce infection risk for our guests and staff. And you should know that Ecolab's Global Pest Team is here to help you and support you. All right, let's get started with a brief introduction to mosquito significance and biology. As I already mentioned, mosquitoes are one of the most deadliest animals in the world, and they're known vectors for many serious viruses like malaria, dengue, and West Nile. And more recently, you've probably heard about Zika, which has exploded in Latin America and more recently here in the United States as well. Zika in particular continues to be making headlines and driving heightened concern for our customers and their guests. And we understand that mosquitoes can have a big impact to your business, including the impact to guest satisfaction, brand reputation, potential for legal risk, and your overall bottom line. Before we get more into the detail around Zika, I'd like to take a few moments to discuss some general facts around mosquito biology and behavior. Mosquitoes require two important things. One is a blood meal for the females to reproduce, and the other is water for the aquatic stages to develop into adults. In many areas of the world, they're more than just a nuisance pest, and they have the ability to transmit several life-threatening diseases that I mentioned on the previous slide. There are over 3,500 species of mosquitoes worldwide, but only a couple hundred or so that we actually experience here in North America. Different species of mosquitoes can be classified into groups, and the potential to transmit disease depends on which group and species they represent. The two species of mosquitoes responsible for transmission of the Zika virus are Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus, otherwise known as the yellow fever mosquito and the Asian tiger mosquito. These two mosquitoes are closely related and share similar biology and habits. In addition to being active at dawn and dusk like most other species, these two in particular are also active during the day. They can be persistent biters, meaning that they can feed multiple times throughout their adult lives, which increases the potential for these two to be successful vectors of disease. As I mentioned earlier, all species of mosquitoes are semi-aquatic, meaning they need water to develop and reproduce. The egg, larvae, and pupal stages require water to develop and survive, and the adults require a blood meal to develop eggs. And it's actually only the females that bite and require the blood meal to develop those eggs. Males and females will also feed on plant nectars. The entire life cycle from egg to adult is completed in about 8 to 10 days, depending on temperature and humidity. One thing that's unique about Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus is that they can develop in as little as a tablespoon of water. This is why they're also known as container breeding or treehole species. This makes identification of the potential breeding site slightly more difficult. In fact, most of the time spent on developing a proper treatment program depends on determining all the potential breeding sites, which can be more difficult for this species in particular. Here, for example, are some potential breeding sites for the two Aedes mosquitoes that are responsible for vectoring Zika virus. And they may include some items like you see here on the left, such as flower pots, drains, gutters, old tires, tree holes, potholes in a parking lot, or plants that capture pooling water. This is all in addition to small ponds, ditches, and other land depressions that could fill with stagnant water for several days. The Aedes adults are generally poor flyers, and they tend not to fly too far away from their breeding source, generally less than half a mile or so. and they often take frequent breaks in their flight patterns. So once they emerge from their breeding sites, they'll be looking for cool, dark areas to rest between host searching and egg laying. This may include some of those areas that are on the right-hand side there, like such as dark hallways, decks, eaves, or overhangs on the structure. They also prefer to rest on vegetation around the structure, which may include thick grass or broadleaf plants, and that is generally where they prefer to rest on the underside of the leaves to remain protected from the sun and other environmental conditions. So now that I've covered some of their preferred breeding sites and resting sites, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hanlon, and he's going to cover off on some of the preferred habitats for these species.
Okay, thanks, Joelle. I'm going to take a few minutes and describe Zika virus infection, its symptoms, modes of transmission, its geographical spread through the Americas, and the current situation, in particular the U.S. So Joelle talked about the hyperlocal habitats of the Aedes species. The preferred geographical habitat for them is around the more tropical and subtropical regions of the world. The map that you see here shows the distribution patterns for the Aegypti on the top and albopictus species on the bottom. You can see that while the Aedes albopictus is a slightly broader range, both are most common in the south and southeastern portions of the United States. However, I want to remind all of you that even though the mosquito species is present in these areas, it does not mean that the virus, or in this case, the Zika virus, is present in all these geographies. So let's get right up to date. This map shows the countries and territories that are reporting active Zika virus transmission. And as you can see, the majority of countries in South America, Central America, Mexico, and the U.S., in particular Florida and Texas, are reporting active transmission of the Zika virus. As we begin to look at the virus and the disease, it's worth describing the current situation, especially in the U.S. and in Puerto Rico. So last July, Florida health officials reported mosquito-borne disease and localized transmission in Florida. In August, the Health and Human Services declared a public health emergency in Puerto Rico. And just 3 months ago, in November of 2016, the first mosquito-borne transmission of Zika was reported in Brownsville, Texas. As of this month, CDC has reported 214 mosquito-borne cases in Florida and 6 in Texas. It's important to note that we're currently in the quiet period in many areas, but as mosquito season develops, we're going to see more cases reported in many countries in the Americas. The situation regarding Zika has rapidly escalated over the past 21 months. Perhaps the 2 sentinel events occurred in May of 2015 when Zika virus was reported in Brazil, about the same time as reports surfaced concerning head and brain deformities in newborn babies. And then in February 2016, the World Health Organization declared Zika to be a public health emergency of international concern. And as I just mentioned, mosquito-borne transmission of Zika was reported first in Florida and then Texas in July and November, respectively. So on this slide, going from left to right, we have already discussed the 2 species of mosquito that carry the Zika virus. What is particularly worrisome is that most people, in fact 4 out of 5 people, infected with Zika virus won't exhibit symptoms and therefore may not even know they have the disease. Symptoms of Zika virus infection include headache, fever, skin rash, joint pain, and conjunctivitis, or reddening of the eye. And these symptoms develop 2 to 7 days after being bitten by an infected mosquito. I talked earlier about the explosive growth of Zika globally. To date, the World Health Organization reports that 76 countries and territories have reported Zika virus infection. And of the 76, 59 countries and territories have reported outbreaks since 2015. There are 3 documented modes of transmission of Zika virus. From the bite of an infected mosquito, that's the same species that can carry dengue and chikungunya viruses. During pregnancy, where a pregnant woman can pass the Zika virus to her fetus. And through sex, Zika virus can be sexually transmitted from an infected man to his partners. There is also emerging evidence that Zika is a virus that can also be spread through blood transfusions as well as organ and tissue transplants. So on the one hand, people might not realize they've been infected and symptoms may appear to be relatively mild. However, as I mentioned earlier, Zika virus can be passed from a pregnant woman to her unborn baby. According to the US CDC, there is now enough evidence to conclude that Zika virus infection during pregnancy is a cause of microcephaly, as well as other severe fetal brain defects, including eye defects, hearing loss, and impaired growth. There have also been clinical reports of some people experiencing a form of paralysis known as Guillain-Barré syndrome. So Guillain-Barré syndrome is a rare disorder in which a person's own immune system damages their nerve cells, causing muscle weakness and sometimes paralysis. But it's important to note that several viral infections, as well as a few bacterial infections as well, can also cause Guillain-Barré syndrome. So this is the most up-to-date map of cases of Zika virus infection in the U.S. At this time, 95% of cases in the U.S. are travel-related. That is, people who were infected outside of the U.S. Cases of Zika virus have been reported in 49 states, as well as the District of Columbia. And as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing small pockets of localized mosquito-borne or vector-borne transmission in the Miami-Dade area of Florida, as well as Brownsville, Texas. The situation is very different in U.S. territories, like the U.S. Virgin Islands, American Samoa, and Puerto Rico. And in Puerto Rico, almost 36,000 cases of locally acquired Zika have been reported. And as I mentioned earlier, a public health state of emergency has been declared in Puerto Rico due to Zika virus disease. Earlier, I showed a global map of where the 2 species of mosquitoes live. But here is a more focused map on geographical range of Aegypti and Albopictus in the U.S. So these represent potential, let me repeat, potential areas in the U.S. where localized outbreaks might occur. Protecting yourself, your family, your employees, and your customers from being bitten by mosquitoes is important, but it's vitally relevant if you live and or operate businesses in the shaded blue and green zones. And so in my closing remarks, they're going to center on the outlook for Zika virus. I think that Dr. Mike Osterholm at the University of Minnesota has summarized it well. He believes that outbreaks and cases of Zika virus disease will increase over the next 2 to 3 years, followed by periodic outbreaks, similar to what we're currently seeing for dengue and for chikungunya. The fact that sexual transmission of Zika virus disease occurs is going to amplify the public health threat globally. And as more people become infected, the pool will become larger for mosquitoes to spread the infection. So I'll now turn it back over to Joelle, who will specifically talk about reducing risk of Zika infection.
Okay, thanks, John. There are many different ways that you can protect yourself and your customers from the risk of exposure to mosquitoes. So first, you should educate yourself on the topic and raise awareness among your customers and staff. Leverage infographics. There are many good pieces of literature that can be found on the CDC and WHO websites, as well as Ecolab's own infographic that you see here on the right-hand side of the screen. Other ways to reduce risk include eliminating potential breeding sites, working with community leaders to engage the local community, and finally, there are ways to reduce exposure to bites, which I'll talk about next here. So to protect yourself, remember to apply insect repellent if you're planning on being outdoors for extended periods of time. We recommend a DEET or keratin-based insect repellent that can be purchased from a local sportsman store or hardware store. That'll provide the best results. Many people inquire about which brand to buy, but it's important to look at the concentration of active ingredient and select a product that contains at least 20% DEET or higher. It's also important to keep doors closed and install fans near entry points or outdoor seating areas to keep mosquitoes away. Remember, I mentioned that they are poor flyers and they don't travel well through high wind speeds. You can also use plug-in repellents or mosquito bed nets to protect yourself at night against some of the other species of mosquitoes that are more active at that time. And lastly, wearing long sleeves and pants to keep yourself covered during the day and prevent being bitten by mosquitoes. There are also many steps that you can take to protect your customers and employees at your properties. First, remove potential breeding sites. This could be as simple as emptying or removing items that catch and hold rainwater. Or it could involve filling potholes in the parking lot or altering the landscape to reduce the potential breeding and resting sites. Check gutters and drains for pooling water sources and clear any blockage that may be creating a mosquito breeding site. Install or fix damaged screens to prevent entry or access into the structure, and leave fans running day and night to create that wind speed that makes it difficult for them to fly through and into the structure. Educate your staff and customers on how to prevent mosquito breeding sites and how to protect yourself. And finally, another important step to reducing mosquito pressure at your property is to partner with a pest management company. And in partnering with a pest management company, here's some of the ways that Ecolab can help. Ecolab's science-based 3-step program is specifically designed to help reduce mosquito pressure at your facility. The first steps include a thorough inspection of the property to identify the potential breeding sites and the adult resting sites. And recommendations will then be made if there are items on the property that can be addressed by the property manager. If the potential breeding sites cannot be addressed, step 2, listed here as prevent, includes the treatment of potential breeding sites using products called larvicides. These products are environmentally friendly and developed to specifically target and kill mosquito larvae without harming the environment or non-target organisms. The final step, step 3, which is called protect, includes the treatment of potential adult resting sites using specialized equipment to get the product to the areas on the structure and the underside of the leaves where the adults are typically found resting. This final step also includes the inspection and maintenance of mosquito traps that are placed in high-risk areas such as outdoor dining areas or pool areas, and they're used to intercept mosquito activity, monitor the level of activity, and determine whether service frequency should be increased during times or seasons with high pressure. And we have a couple of good case studies that I'd like to highlight here next. One of the case studies was completed in Mexico last year where we saw an 80% reduction in mosquito activity after 6 weeks of being on the program. We incorporated the multi-step treatment program on week 1 and continued to count the number of mosquitoes caught in traps on a weekly basis. In addition to the 80% reduction in activity, we also saw a 90% reduction in the level of guest complaints at this property. And here's another example of a case study where we have some additional data to share, and this was conducted in Brazil. We had 5 locations that were tracked as part of this study over a 5-week time frame, and we saw a 75% reduction in activity overall. So both of these cases really represent a good success story. I'd like to just quickly mention a few additional resources out there. In addition to Ecolab, there's a variety of resources available from the CDC for more information about Zika and mosquito control. And many of these resources are created for specific groups that are seeking additional information, such as pregnant women, parents, or travelers. And John mentioned a few earlier, but there are a lot of additional resources out there. So here's just a few of them, including the World Health Organization, Center for Disease Control, and Ecolab. This now concludes our formal presentation, so we'll move into the question and answer portion. I'm going to hand it back over to John to go ahead and lead this section.
Yeah, terrific. Thanks, Joelle. Yeah, we would ask that you, we're beginning to see a couple of questions coming in, so that's great. But we would encourage you to send in your questions or comments or even anything that you're doing on your particular properties. So Joelle, let's just kind of scroll through the questions here that are coming in. This first question, they're asking about the trials in both Brazil and Mexico. And let me just read this real quick. It says, were you really let me read this again. Were you really capturing over 1,000 mosquitoes when you did this particular study?
Yes, so the numbers that I showed on the graph that I presented on the graph there is showing the total catch of mosquitoes. One of the slides showed the individual catches of mosquito from a single property, and the other slide showed a cumulative average of what we were catching. So there were several traps on the property, but that is the total catch count.
So the attendee is really saying, did you catch over 1,000 mosquitoes on the property at that point of sampling?
Yes, that is true.
Super. Another question that came in was, can you explain the difference between travel and localized transmission? Why don't I take that one? So travel related is, you'll appreciate that if somebody from the U.S. perhaps travels down to Central America or South America, is bitten by an infected mosquito, then becomes infected with Zika, and then travels back to the U.S. That would be, and perhaps is beginning to show symptoms. That would be a case of travel-related Zika virus. In terms of localized, and in my formal remarks, I was using three words interchangeably. Localized really is mosquito-borne, and that is also known as vector-borne. So that would be a situation, say, in Brownsville, Texas, or in Miami-Dade County, where an infected individual, somebody who is infected with Zika virus, is bitten by, let's say, an uninfected mosquito. That mosquito takes a blood meal. That mosquito now becomes infected with Zika virus. And then somewhat later, perhaps later in the day, maybe a day later, takes another blood meal. That mosquito can then transmit the virus that they picked up from person A to the mosquito, and then that mosquito can then infect person B. So that would be, I think, a good example of localized transmission. And again, that's the same as localized transmission. It's the same as mosquito-borne, and that's the same as vector-borne. So very good question, seeking clarification. Somebody who came on said, okay, this goes right back to one of my slides. What is the outlook on Zika virus in the next 2 to 3 years? Is it expected to spread to other states? So let me go back to one of the slides that I showed just a few minutes ago, and that was really some a summation of comments that I've heard from Dr. Mike Osterholm at the University of Minnesota. And he believes that outbreaks and cases of Zika virus disease are going to increase over the next 2 to 3 years. And then we're going to see periodic outbreaks, much like we're seeing now with respect to chikungunya and dengue. So we're not hearing a lot about it right now, beyond the fact that a number of pharmaceutical firms are currently working on a vaccine. But in terms of actual cases, really it's been quite quiet on the media front. But then again, we are in quiet mosquito season. As we move into the spring break time frame, as we move into the development of mosquito season, and as more cases and new cases start to be reported, I think we're going to hear a significant uptick in terms of cases of Zika and the health concerns that public health officials express. So right now we've seen a couple of hundred cases of localized transmission in Miami-Dade. We've seen 6 cases in Brownsville, Texas. I do expect that that will develop, and we're going to see localized transmission occurring in other regions, particularly in these green and blue shaded areas, which represent the geographical spread of Aedes and albopictus in the U.S. I think this next question is probably well suited for you, Joelle, and that is, can you give me a little more detail around Ecolab's mosquito program, in particular the chemistries that you use?
Sure, I can take that one. So we use a variety, we use a variety of products and equipment as part of our program and our approach. All of these products are EPA-approved products to be used to target mosquitoes and protect a property. So one of the products that we use that we often get a lot of questions around is the larvicide treatment for the aquatic stages, so the eggs, the larvae, and the pupal stages that we're targeting there. Those larvicide products are labeled for that application, and they're very environmentally friendly. They include specific bacteria that dissolves and breaks up into the surface water area. The mosquito larvae will feed on it, and it is very specifically targeted to the mosquito larvae. So it's a very effective product and to help break that life cycle. The products that we use on the structure for those adult harborage resting sites are labeled for such applications as well. And the equipment that we use specifically targets those applications not only to the structure, but also the underside of leaves so that we can target areas where the adults are resting during the daytime. And those are really meant to create a barrier of protection for that property as well.
All right, and just coming in here, still coming in here. Okay, actually it's directly related to that. Do your treatments harm wildlife and honeybees? I think this person is probably following up on what you said about the larvicide and the bacteria.
Sure. So, that question comes up quite a bit, and again, the products we use are labeled for application to specific areas. So the products that we use in the larvicide applications, again, are very specific to the larval stages of mosquitoes and do not have an effect on non-target organisms. The liquid residual products that we're using to the landscaping or the areas on the structure, we are not allowed to place those products on flowering plants or other areas where there are pollinators frequent, such as honeybees and other organisms in that sense. So we don't apply the product to areas where there are blooming plants or crops as well, just to make sure that we are not having any impact to those non-target organisms in the environment.
Okay, and a clarifying question coming in from someone is, so the larvicide is not part of a fogging program? Is it directly added to water?
Okay, good question. Fogging is a common term that has been used traditionally for mosquito control, and it really is a traditional approach. It only targets adult stages, and it's a very short-lived product application. It gets the product up into the air where mosquitoes are flying, but it only provides relief from mosquitoes for a few hours, very short-term protection. A more practical approach that provides long-term protection of the property is similar to the program that I've described here, which includes thorough inspection to identify those breeding and harborage or adult resting sites, as well as the application of larvicides to target and treat the larval stages to prevent them from from emerging as adults, biting adults, and then finally the application of those residual products to the structure and the landscape to really knock down any adults long term. So as you saw in the case studies that I presented here, when you have a multi-step approach, you can really reduce mosquito activity for the long term rather than a product like fogging that really only protects for a few hours in an area.
All right, then here's a just kind of a general education question that is coming in, Joel. You mentioned mosquito traps. What are they? What do they do, and how do they work?
Okay.
Very simple?
Yep. So there are a lot of different mosquito traps out there. The one that we specifically use in our program, we've evaluated it and tested it and found it to be the most effective one for larger properties, and specifically in those areas where there's more high risk of your guests or your staff encountering activity outdoors. The mosquito traps use a combination of heat, CO2, and light to attract the mosquitoes into the trap. There's a fan that captures them, blows them into a catch basin, where they are trapped. And then as part of our service, we will maintain those traps. We will empty the catch basin and really use them to monitor the level of activity on that property.
Okay. Another question just coming in here. All right. The next question is, I operate 3 properties in Fort Lauderdale. When does mosquito season start for me, and what should I be doing?
Okay, yes, that's a great question. So mosquito season will vary across the country, of course. There are some areas of the country that will have mosquito pressure all year round, but we do provide some additional information so for those folks outside of the Fort Lauderdale area. We have a map on the Ecolab website that shows the seasonality of mosquitoes and when to really start considering mosquito season. That's really based on the temperature and the environment and when mosquitoes are going to be more prevalent in those areas versus others. So we take that information into account as well when we are developing a mosquito program for our customers' properties. Not all properties need to have a mosquito program that's a 12-month program. Some may require only an 8-month program. Some may require a 6-month program. And some of those in the northern states may only require a 3-month mosquito program to protect that property. So I think we'd have to take a look at that map and take a look at the exact area where this is at to determine how frequently the service program would be required for that particular property.
All right, terrific. Let me just read this. I don't have any ponds on my property. Should I be concerned about mosquitoes?
Okay, so this is a great question because some properties may not have larger bodies of water, but they are still at risk of mosquitoes. And if you remember, as part of the presentation deck that I covered on the biology and behavior, the 2 species that are particularly responsible for vectoring Zika as well as dengue and chikungunya, they only require a tablespoon of water to develop and survive. So just very small amounts of water that can be found on any property basically could be a potential breeding site. And so those are the areas that when we develop our programs, we're really targeting for those type of locations. Also, there are other species of mosquitoes that fly from greater distances. There are certain species out there that will fly up to a mile away from their breeding site. So if there are ponds or lakes or ditches that are filling with stagnant water for extended periods of time, even though they're off property, the mosquito activity could be still flying and encountering your property. So that's where it's really important that those liquid residual treatments that we apply to the undersides of leaves and the vegetation around the structure, it creates that barrier of protection so that when you've got mosquitoes flying from further distances, they, as I mentioned, will take breaks. They will rest on those surfaces. That's where we really want to target those treatments for any of those type of species of mosquitoes.
All right. Wow, here's a good question. This a challenging one. Joelle, I'm actually going to give this one to you. I have a property in Florida, but right next door to me is a derelict property, and there's a lot of tires and trash and empty soda bottles. Is this a risk to my guests and staff?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it can definitely be a risk because you can have all those potential breeding sites next door, and that could be contributing to the activity that you're seeing on your specific property. So one of the things that we can do and that your pest provider should do is get the local community involved in situations like that. Sometimes we can get the local Department of Agriculture or the local community itself to get involved in trying to remove those potential breeding sites. Or even if they can't be removed, sometimes they can be treated as well. But because it's off property, we generally need to get another level of approval on something like that. So again, your pest provider should be able to help you work through that with also your state and local authorities. So
fair to say, Joe, I'll just add a little bit of commentary here, that community involvement is also important, even though it may be outside of your premise.
Yeah, this is a very critical aspect to this whole thing.
Somewhat related question, restaurateur is asking about outdoor dining. But it's interesting, their outdoor dining is only open in the evening. So.
Okay, yes, I mean, that's a common spot as well that can have issues with mosquito activity. So outdoor dining, restaurant type situation, our program can also help alleviate mosquito pressure in that circumstance as well. So even, if there's no areas on site that would be treated specifically with the larvicide products, again, we would be focusing our residual applications to those areas of the structure, like overhangs, eaves of the deck, if it's an upper deck area, as well as the treatment of the vegetation around the structure to help minimize that activity. And then most importantly, the position of a mosquito trap in that area, I think, would be very effective at intercepting mosquito activity that might be causing a nuisance or a risk to your guests.
All right. We've got somebody asking, is it possible to get a copy of the slide deck? And what I can say is that the deck and a recording of our webinar will be available on ecolab.com later this week. Why don't we just give it another 30 seconds and see if any more questions come in. All right, not seeing any. Joelle, maybe I'll just turn it over to you to maybe make some closing comments and let folks know who they can contact at Ecolab for further information.
Okay, thanks a lot, and thank you to everyone for your time today. Really appreciate being able to talk about the program that Ecolab has to offer, as well as just providing an update on the Zika virus situation. If you're looking for more information, you can go to ecolab.com or as well reach out to your Ecolab representative. So thanks again for today's session.
Okay. So with that, we thank you all for participating, and again, thank you for giving us your time today. Thank you.